and this is the result. This is the fire that has been raging since around 1 o'clock this afternoon in Wennington, Greater London. I want to bring in Professor Ed Galea. He is founding director of the Fire Safety Engineering Group at the University of Greenwich, and he joins us from South East London, where there's a fire burning not too far from you, too, in Croydon. Talk to me about your thoughts on what we're witnessing today.
Well, I think this is an indication of things to come. I think we need to be prepared for experiencing a lot more of these wildfires as the climate changes, as it gets hotter and drier in the UK. We're likely to see more of these types of incidents, and we need to be prepared for them, not just in terms of the way the fire service responds, but also how we design our urban environment, especially what's known as the WUI, the wildland urban interface. The fire we're seeing now on the screen is an example of a fire affecting a WUI, an urban environment on the edge of wildland. And we can learn from other countries around the world that have had to face this sort of problem for many, many years. And so, for example, you build fire breaks around your properties. You pick the type of plantings that you have in close proximity to your property so that they are less likely to easily combust. One of the things I think that on days like today, I'm from Australia originally. I've been in the UK for 35 years, but I'm from Australia, and it was not uncommon to have days like today in Australia, where I'm from, and we would have days of total fire ban. So it would be illegal to have a barbecue outside, for example, anywhere, even in your own backyard. You could not have a naked fire anywhere on days of total fire ban. What types of days are days of total fire ban? Well, they would come on days where you've had a long period of dry days, high temperatures, and potentially strong winds, because any small spark can set off a fire, as we're seeing on the sky screen now. So I think there's a lot we can learn from other countries that have experienced this, and we need to be prepared. You know, this is not going to go away. This threat is not going to go away. Another
Professor
real...
Galea, I just want to alert our viewers, we'll carry on talking, but I just want to alert our viewers to the fact that we now have live pictures from the scene in Wennington. That looks like a much more encouraging scene. Well, actually, no, as you pull out, not so much for those homes there, but it does seem a number of the fires have been put out. Firefighters still tackling with those. You can see on the left of your screen there, top left. Sadly, they are people's homes. Professor Galea, sorry, please pick up on what you were talking about. I found it remarkable that you're from Australia, where they are experiencing, you know, unprecedented flooding in Sydney. And then on the other side of the world, where we're probably used to flooding, we're getting these extreme temperatures. It just seems bonkers.
And I think another point that we have to keep in mind is the critical national infrastructure. These wildfires can threaten our national infrastructure, for example, the power cables and substations. And if we start losing power in these sorts of extreme temperature days, that's going to create a whole range of other problems. Other issues that we have to consider is when we've got these sorts of fires threatening the urban interface, what about when we have hospitals and care facilities? Are we prepared to do a mass evacuation of these sorts of facilities because of unprecedented fires? And the other thing I think we need to be aware of, while LFB, while the London Fire Brigade may be trained in handling one or two of these fires, what happens when you've got tens of fires around the capital and in the capital, these wildfires that require tens and if not hundreds of firefighters at each of these locations? Are we prepared for this type of contingency? And this is where we're going with climate change. We're going to face hotter, drier, longer summers, and these types of fires are going to become the norm, not the exception.
Professor Galea, the helicopter seems to have changed its camera vantage point, and we now seem to be looking at a separate fire in another location. That is just as we were talking, I was just watching the helicopter move. And for those who aren't too familiar with the area, this is Greater London, Essex, the Greater London Essex border. Wennington, Rainham, Dagenham. We do know that there has been a fire in Dagenham today. London Fire Brigade included that on the list of fires that they are tackling as part of this major incident. Let's go back to what we do about this. I was talking to a wildfire tactics expert a little earlier. He was called Craig Hope. And he said, look, you know, I've been studying this for years in Wales. And it's hard, not just because of the to-do list and the money involved in setting up systems and structures to tackle this, but also the willingness of people with the money and power to listen. What do you think events this week will do in terms of changing that particular aspect of the fight?
Well, I'm not sure it's necessarily going to make much of a difference. I mean, you only have to look at Grenfell and the problems we've had with Grenfell Tower, where 72 people lost their lives. And I'm afraid we really haven't learned the lessons from Grenfell. So while what we're seeing today is an important wake-up call, I really hope that the authorities take the message and wake up and start planning for these types of incidents, because I don't think we are prepared to deal with these types of incidents on a large scale. I'm not talking about the one or two spot fires, but on a large scale. And the other thing we have to be concerned about is that a lot of these wildfires, this is from experience around the world, and also in Wales, I should add, that a lot of these fires are not just necessarily started by accident or natural causes. Some of these fires are deliberately lit as well.
Why? I never understand that, because again, Craig Hope, the expert, said that earlier about Wales. He made that point as well and said that they're caused deliberately. Why on earth would someone do that? Excuse my naivety.
I mean, for a whole range of reasons. I mean, there are some fires in Europe that have been started deliberately, purely because people wanted to. If the land has been devastated by a fire in these particular European countries, then they're allowed to develop them, because the forest has been burnt down, and so they're allowed to develop them. So sometimes there's an economic reason for starting the fire, but often it's just the thrill of starting a fire and seeing a large flames, and I mean, it's hard to understand the mind of people who would deliberately start these types of large fires, because it's not just the risk and the damage to the environment and to property and the infrastructure. You're also putting lives at risk, and that's probably the biggest concern: putting lives at risk.
Yeah, I think we can safely call them idiots, can't we? I'm sure people use far stronger language. It's unbelievable what people do, but whether it's an accident or whether it started deliberately, the consequences are serious. I just want to alert viewers to the fact that you may have seen top left of the screen. A new record temperature has been set. The village of Coningsby in Lincolnshire has hit 40.3 degrees Celsius this afternoon. That is now the UK's record temperature. Just let that sink in for a little bit. It's getting hotter. I mean, it's nearly 5 o'clock in the evening, but temperatures in some parts of the UK still creeping up. Professor Galea, I mean, it's not a competition. Nobody wants to break these records today. It's really grim. It's really grim out there today. It is going to change tomorrow. But as we prepare for a new kind of normal, how much more of this do you think we will see, and how frequently?
I think there's a good chance that we're going to be seeing this sort of thing every summer season. And what's even more concerning, on the continent in Europe, the fire seasons were strictly restricted to the high summer. But now what we're seeing in Europe, because of climate change, is that the fire season is spreading to occur outside high summer and even outside of summer. And we're reaching a point in mainland Europe where the fire season could be all year round. We're not anywhere near that in the UK, but certainly in the summer season, what we're seeing on the sky screens now could become the norm. And we need to prepare for that, both in our planning and in our behaviour. As I said, days of total fire ban. We should be looking at introducing that in the UK to remove the chances or reduce the chances of accidentally starting fires in the parched, dry environment.
Professor Galea, stay with us. I'm just going to take our viewers live to the scene in Wennington. Aisha Zahid, Sky News' Aisha Zahid is on the scene for us. Aisha, what information have you been gathering? People's homes on fire as temperatures exceed 40 degrees today, 40.3 degrees Celsius in the village of Coningsby in Lincolnshire right now. That record has just been broken within the last few minutes. Professor Galea is still on the line to talk to us about the bigger picture, really. I mean, we're focusing in on this fire because that is indeed a snapshot of the UK right now. The UK is baking. Some parts are burning. What do you think is going to happen when the weather returns to relative normality tomorrow? Because people's minds move on, the news agenda moves on. I mean, you know, Sky News is very much keeping the climate emergency in the headlines. But, you know, what should we be focusing on from tomorrow?
Well, I wouldn't rest easy because we're going to have a cool break tomorrow. We're going to have a cool break, and we might even be lucky enough to get some rain. But the ground is parched. A little bit of rain isn't going to make an awful lot of difference. If we're going to just have a brief lull in the temperatures and again in the high 30s for another period of time, you know, we could be seeing the same sort of thing happening again. So just because we're going to get a cool break this evening and possibly tomorrow, that doesn't mean that this problem's gone away. As I said, you know, the country really needs to start changing its mindset and starting to prepare for this. I mean, the fire services, for example, but you know, we potentially need the types of equipment that you see in the continent, in North America and in Australia for fighting large wildfires, aerial appliances that can be flown over to drop fire retardant or water on vast areas. You know, these are the things that we possibly need to start thinking about for the not too distant future. And as I say, planning. Some of my main research work is how do you plan to evacuate whole communities from wildfires, from floods and wildfires, and our work is being applied, you know, in countries like in Europe and in North America and in Australia, where we use our modelling tools to come up with procedures to how you would manage the evacuation of large communities of people, especially when the infrastructure hasn't really been designed for it. There might only be one road in and out of a township, but you need to take that into consideration when you're planning how you're going to potentially evacuate the township. So you know there are lots of things we need to start thinking about. You know, this is a big wake-up call, and we really need to start thinking about a whole range of things that you know, maybe even 5-10 years ago, we didn't even believe we'd ever have to consider in this country.
So it's about planning, and you talk about a change of mindset. Well, funnily enough, there'll be a new Prime Minister soon, and they were asked about that in the last TV leaders debate, and they all said that they would commit to the net zero target, apart from Kemi Badenoch, who's not in the race anymore. She said, which is actually quite a few people's mindset, that as long as it doesn't impact on us right now, because, you know, we're in a cost of living crisis and tackling the climate emergency costs money. What would you say to the next Prime Minister about what is happening now and what needs to be done? Not just, you know, not looking ahead to 2030, 2050 or whatever, but right now.
I'd say open your eyes and just have a look at Sky News and see this is our future. And we need to prepare for it and plan for it. We can manage this. It can be managed. But that's going to take planning, and it's going to take the will to spend money to address a lot of these problems, and the will to introduce regulations. I mean, for example, total fire bans. You know, it seems, again, as an Australian in this country, when we're faced with these types of temperatures and these types of wind conditions over periods of time, it just amazes me that people are allowed to go out and have a barbecue. It just astounds me.
Yeah, I mean, London Fire Brigade have reissued a list of measures today that they want to see enforced. Again, you know, it's personal responsibility. I've had quite a few people on social media contact me and go, "You're telling us the obvious. That's not what starts the fire." It's things like not having disposable barbecues in open spaces and
It's
parks.
any fire.
Yeah, it's about, you know, not leaving broken glass as litter in open spaces.
Yeah.
It sounds like the basics, but perhaps you could run us through. I mean, the bigger picture is, you know, government taking big steps to tackle this. But when we're looking at people's homes on fire and the like, it does come down to small measures individuals can do. So perhaps you can run through some of them for us. You've mentioned barbecues, but what other bits can people do to stop this from happening?
Well, I mean, I think obviously you want to remove as many sources of ignition as you can. So barbecuing is one thing. You mentioned the litter, you know, broken glass on these sorts of hot days. A broken bottle in these dried out fields could act as a magnifying glass and start a fire. Start a fire going. Protecting your properties by having a break, clearing the land around your property, making sure that you don't have combustible fuels in the vicinity of your property, especially if you're living in a forested area. You know, make sure that you've cleared the land in the immediate vicinity of your house. Make sure that you've cleared the guttering of your house, because wildfires can spread. They can jump roads, for example, quite easily through what's known as an ember attack. The flaming embers, are carried by the wind, and they can go ahead of the fire front. They can be hundreds of meters ahead of the fire front, and those embers, if they fall into a dry field, can set off another fire. And if you have a house in a forested area, if your guttering, for example, is not cleared, an ember could fall into the guttering and set the whole thing alight. So, you know, these sorts of things, depending on where you live and the environment you live in, I think there are many things you can do to reduce the likelihood of your property going up in flames, as these poor unfortunate people, as we're seeing on Sky News, as they've lost their homes and their properties. I mean, we can do things to reduce that risk.
I just want to update our viewers, because obviously we're concentrating on Greater London. That's where our helicopter is, so we're watching this unfold in real time. And that major incident has been declared across London by London Fire Brigade. But Leicestershire Fire and Rescue Service have also declared a major incident today because of the high demand across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. They say, "We will not be attending automatic fire alarms. Please only call us in the case of an emergency. We're currently in attendance at a grass fire off Bradgate Hill in Groby. Fire pumps and a water carrier at the scene. Please avoid the area." So, you know, we're looking at Greater London, but this is happening up and down the country. There were 24 fires across the UK yesterday. There's a dramatic picture on the front page of, I think it was an Independent this morning, of a wildfire near Chesterfield. These things are happening across the UK. Just a final word, if I may, Professor Galea, about what kind of response is happening at the scene that we're looking at now, in terms of, we understand it's 175 firefighters at the last count and over 100 fire engines. Talk to me about the operation.
Well, I mean, they'll have various tactics. I mean, earlier on in the fire, they'd be trying to prevent the spread of the grass fire towards the property line. Once the fire has hit the property line, they may be trying to prevent the fire from spreading to other properties, adjacent properties, potentially, for example, watering, wetting the neighbouring houses, as well as trying to put out the fires. I mean, we can see on the TV now there are at least 3 fires, blazing fires. A fourth building is smoking, so there's an internal fire has started. So the fire service will be trying really hard to contain the fire, put out the fires in the property, save the property if they can, save the adjacent properties, water down the adjacent properties to reduce the risk of fire spreading to the adjacent properties. You know, these these guys are going to be working really hard. And you can imagine it's hard work. Fighting a fire is hard work at any time, but under these high temperature conditions, you know, the firefighters, these men and women that are fighting the fires, I mean, they're unbelievable. It's a very, very demanding job that they're doing.
Yeah, doing all that, they're used to extreme temperatures. Of course, they fight fires, but, you know, having to deal with the actual temperature, the regular temperature as well.
Well, they have no respite, okay, because even if they're not even if they're not at the fire front, if they've pulled back, they're still experiencing this sort of heat that we're all experiencing. And so, you know, they need to be able to cool down their core body temperatures if they're going to go in and fight the fire again. You know, they have to ensure that their core body temperature doesn't exceed a critical value, because at the end of the day, you know, we don't want our firefighters collapsing. So it's a really hard job, and under these conditions, it's made doubly hard, because it's hard to have respite. It's hard to have any relief.
Thoughts with the firefighters today, and of course the residents that have been affected by fires up and down the UK over the last 48 hours. Professor Galea, really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for your expertise here on Sky News. We appreciate it. That UK record temperature broken again today. Coningsby, the village in Lincolnshire, taking that unwanted record, 40.3 degrees Celsius today. We understand from the Met Office that at least 29 observation sites across England have provisionally broken the previous all-time maximum UK record of 38.7 degrees Celsius this afternoon.